Right. Basically, I'm using an iPhone to give me the picture that's here, and I have my webcam and I have PowerPoint presentation for later and stuff like that. So, because I don't have access to proper screen capture hardware, I'd love to get a cam link, but obviously with the way things are and we can't get out, you know, I'll, so you're going to be doing a lot of looking at me from a side angle for a lot of this, but we'll just get going anyway. So that's not too bad. There's a few there, right? Okay. So it'll be a lot of there will be a good bit of screen changing going on from one thing to another. So if everything falls apart, just bear with me. Anyway, so Speedlights, okay? They're the next step up to your on-camera flashes, basically. And this is a Godox Speedlight, and it's a fairly old model. It's an 850, and it's basically what's called a dumb Speedlight, okay? So if you look at the end of it there, it only has one pin and the contact. It's not it doesn't have TTL features. TTL features would have like 4 or 5 pins depending on the camera. It could be a Nikon or a Canon or a Sony or whatever. These particular flashes that I bought, they are only manual flashes. They don't have any of them special features, and I love using manual flash, and I'll explain that later. And these are the triggers that came with them. They're the old style triggers. They used to be they were fairly good at the time. You can get an upgrade for them. All right. So it doesn't really matter what flash you have. Hi, Mary. So everyone is, yeah, the audio's okay there by the looks of it. Not too loud or anything, is it now? Ah, that's grand. Okay, so Speedlight's kind of hang on one second, I just have to check this. Ah, that's grand. Now, so Speedlights are basically like a more powerful version of the flash that you might have on your camera, but it has the ability, most Speedlights have the ability for the head to tilt, for the head to rotate, usually the whole way, mostly the whole way around, and for it to tilt up at an angle. Okay, this is really disconcerting because I'm actually looking at this from a completely reverse angle, so it's going to be interesting. So the first thing would be literally this particular one here. If we open it up, they have lithium ion batteries. They're kind of like heavy duty batteries that you might have in your camera phone. Sorry, not in the camera phone. That yeah, they're the same kind of batteries that would be in your phone, but these are removable. They're not like double A's, okay? And they give you really fast recycle time. So switching this one on, I love these manual ones because they are so simple to use, because there's no complicated stuff with them. They're just switch on, power, zoom, and that's really it, and 1 or 2 features, and I'll go through those as well, right? So switching it on there, and I turn this around. I've turned the head around. Normally the head would sit like that, obviously, on top of the camera. I've turned the head around so I can just show you a few things. The top of this particular flash has a pull-out tab on it. There's a white card, and it also, if you push the white card back in, it has that diffuser panel. The diffuser panel serves 2 purposes, okay? I'll show you now in a second. So the first thing I want to go through is the zoom, the ability to zoom on your camera. At the minute there, you can see the zoom just right down there. It's on 24mm, okay? Just going to try and get closer to that. So the zoom is on 24mm, and if I hit the zoom button, it flashes. and I can go 28 all the way up to 105 on my particular flash. Some Canon flashes can go up to 200mm. And notice the way the head is actually, when I zoom it back out again by hitting zoom and going back out and going to a wide angle, the inside flash head's actually getting closer to the front of the diffuser panel here. And because it's closer to the front, at 105mm, the flash kind of goes out like that in a real kind of straight line, for lack of a better word. Whereas if you have it on 24mm, the flash kind of fills out this way. It's basically doing that to fill out. If you're using a 24-105 camera lens, you would set, if you were shooting wide angle at 24mm, you'd set your camera to 20. You'd set the camera to 24 on the lens, and then you'd also set the flash to 24, because you want the flash to fill the image that you're taking. So conversely, you wouldn't set the flash to 24mm and then set your camera to 105, because you'd be wasting flash power, because you'd be lighting the room or the scene with the flash on a very wide angle. So it'd be too wide, and then all you're doing with your camera is taking a small area of the image. And the opposite to that then would be if you had set your lens and your camera to 24mm and you set your flash to 105 by accident. And what happens then is that I'm just checking something here. Yeah, what happens then is the flash only ends up lighting the middle of the actual image. Okay, so that was just a little bit about the actual the zoom features on the flash. Okay, right, so flashes are basically let me see, I just get my thoughts here together. Okay, so we go through the modes on this particular flash. All right, I'm just going to turn the head back around. So, zoom it in. So on this particular flash, there's only 4 modes, right? There's a manual mode, and then an S1, an S2, and a multi. The manual mode is basically the same as your manual on your camera. I'll explain that now in a minute. I'll go through a PowerPoint presentation with you. And the S1 mode basically looks for a flash to be fired, and it's kind of like slave. And S2 then is a learning slave mode, where it kind of figures out if your on-built camera flash is firing a TTL shot or something, it figures out which flash it needs to fire on. And then the multi then allows you to fire off multiple flashes in per second. Okay, we'll go through those. So in this particular case, you've only got four buttons basically on this. Well, 5 buttons. The first one is your mode button. If I hit the mode button, it goes to S1, then to S2, then to repeat, and back to manual again. Okay, your zoom switches on the zoom, and you can change your zoom from 105mm down to 24mm. Okay, the next one over on this particular camera, or sorry, on this particular flash, doesn't actually do anything, because the one case is used for a couple of different flashes, right? And then the other button in the middle is just a set button, and the bottom corner is your light. So you can see, if I turn the light on there, you can see, if I just turn it sideways, it's handy for seeing it at night time. You can turn the light off then as well. Okay, so there are your 4 buttons. It's really, really simple. And at the default state there, where it's in manual mode, the power on the flash is the next thing. Okay, so with nothing flashing there, no zoom flashing or anything like that, all you have to do is turn the set dial, turn the dial to the anti-clockwise all the way, and it goes to off, and every click is a third of a stop. So 3 clicks will go from 1128 power to 1164 power. Hi Dave, how's it going? Or by any cues, I'm just going to type something in here for 1 second. Just saying, any questions, fire away, because I keep an eye on the thing. So basically, sorry about that. Yeah, flashes work in the same way. I'm going to just turn around for a split second. Flashes work in the same way as your camera's aperture does, or your shutter speed does. This particular flash here, it works in third stops. So say if we had our f-stop was on 5.6 and we wanted to go to f8, okay, so 5.6 to f8, that is one full stop. Okay, that's the equivalent on the flash that I have in front of me of going from 1/64th power and going from 5.6 to f8 lets in less light because the aperture is smaller, so I'll be turning the power down on this. So I'll be going from 1/64th, 1, 2, 3, 3 stops down. Okay, or sorry, three clicks down. Sorry, that's 3. So it's 1/3 of a stop each time. So every time you go 3 clicks on this particular flash, it's equivalent to 1 full stop. And this flash has, I can't remember how many stops it can do. It can go from 1/128 all the way up to full power. 1/128 is the flash's lowest power, and 1:1 is its fullest power. Okay, so if I was to fire this off now at by just pressing that red button there at 1/128 power, you probably, you know, you wouldn't even hear it. It's a very, very low power. So then if I was to get the flash and turn it all the way up to 1:1 power and I fire it, you can hear the pop. It's a lot stronger. Okay, so 1:1 is full power on a flash. 3 clicks to the left is 1/2 power. That's 1 full stop less power. It's the equivalent of going from f8 to, sorry, from f5.6 to f8. It's 1 full stop. Then I go down from 1/2 to 1/4, and then to an 8. That's 2 more stops. 16th, a 32nd, a 64th, and on my case here 1/128. Some other flashes can go down to 2/56th power. Okay, so as I said before, 1/128 power is the lowest power you can have on this particular flash, and 1:1 is the brightest power you can have. All right, and obviously then if we're dealing with I just move this back over here. If we're dealing with using, say, a 24-105 lens, with this particular flash, if I put it onto the camera, as long as I lift the head down like that and leave it in that way, as I zoom in my camera, you'll see the actual zoom change from 24mm all the way to 105. It follows the zoom on the camera as long as the flash is pointing like that and it's not bouncing and it's not pulled fully down for a macro close-up shot. Okay, there's a little click just there is the one you want. All right, now pulling this out the top, that's the diffusion panel. Okay, that sets the flash, even though the flash still says 24, by pulling that diffuser out, it actually widens it out to about 14mm, so it will fill an umbrella even more. Okay, so if you're trying to use a soft shoot-through umbrella to actually make your light softer, by using this pop up here, that diffuser, it will fill the umbrella more and give you a softer light. Okay, it will kill a little bit of the power, but it widens out the light even more. Okay, and then the white card, you've probably seen a lot of photographers use that. It's basically a bounce card. So if it was on the camera, say it was on the camera like that, the bounce card would fire the flash that way and the rest of the flash would hit off the ceiling. Tonight I'm not really talking about bouncing flash around, because The room that I'm in at the minute is my cabin, and it's about 4.5 to 5 foot square that I'm in, and there's no way I could possibly do it. I might at some point try and do something outside and record it or something like that, but this is just literally how flashes work and stuff like that, and there's a PowerPoint now in a few minutes about it. So just pop that back down. All right, now that particular flash comes with that trigger. It's they're not very expensive triggers. It takes AA batteries, and the side switches switch it on there. But the beautiful thing about it is it has a screen on it, so I can see the power of the flash. So if my flash is up somewhere really high on a stand somewhere, I don't have to jump up and try and see what the power is. I can read it off my screen. The only thing is I have to make sure that little plug-in thing at the side there, that's the receiver for the transmitter. So I have to make sure that they're both on the same. So they're both on one, and that they're both on the same dip switches. These are kind of low-end triggers. The newer stuff from Godox is a lot more intuitive, okay? But it still works. So basically what I'm saying is, at the minute there, if I press the up power button, you'll see it goes to a quarter. Now it's at a half. If I go down, 2, 3, it's at a quarter. 1, 2, 3, it's at 1/8 power. And if I hit the test button, then it fires. Okay, that's as simple as these flashes are. They're really, really, really simple. Yeah, John. You can do that. As John there was just saying, you can put a tissue under in this if you want to soften the light a tiny bit. In here, in between where the diffuser pops down, if you just get a tiny piece of tissue paper or a piece of greaseproof paper and let it flap onto it, then it kind of softens it a little bit more, diffuses it. What I would do with this case is, if I wanted to make a slightly bigger light as well as a softer light, I get a sheet of A3 tracing paper and basically tape it to either side here and let it just balloon out. So I'm turning a very, very small light source into a folded over A3 sheet, and the tracing paper then is super soft and it's really cheap. You know, so you don't even, you know, if you haven't got time to get an umbrella, or you don't have one, you can just get a sheet of tracing paper and just do the same thing, you know. But yeah, there's a billion different ways of modifying. I'm going to do probably next week I'll do something on modifiers and stuff like that. But that's basically the trigger and that, and there was this and the flash. So basically what I'm saying is, that's one of these. It's called a dumb. I call them a dumb flash. They're not TTL or high speed sync or anything like that. And you'll always know if you're looking, say, in Game Exchange or something like that. You'll always know if it is one of the not so much a dumb flash, but if it's a basic flash, you'll have one pin on the bottom of it. And if it's not a basic flash, what will happen is, if you're looking at the bottom of the flash, it could look like that. It actually could have 4 or 5 pins on it, you know. They're all for TTL, high speed sync, a load of other stuff like that are okay. But for me, I just use manual because that's what I'm used to, and it just works, and there's no fussing about it, okay. Everything okay? Sound all good? Videos good? Yeah, there's no weird lag or anything going on. That's grand, John. Thanks a million. Just checking there. So, let me see. Yeah, as simple as that is, that's really it. For the mechanics of it and the way it just works. Basically, it fits onto the camera, and it's a it's a bit of it's an unwielding, when you have the two of them together, they're very, very, it's very, very big, but it just fits on the camera like that. Okay. And if I was to turn, yeah, right. Remember what I was saying about the zoom before? This lens, or this flash doesn't do it because it's not a specific flash to Panasonic. So it won't do the thing that I was talking about where it zooms in the flash head. So that's one of the other disadvantages about having a manual one. Now, having said that, that flash and trigger was about 80 euros, 80, 85 euros. And it just goes and goes and goes and goes. So what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to go through a PowerPoint thing and then go back to actually take a few shots and work my head around that. So I'm just going to switch over to PowerPoint here and go through this. This will make a lot more sense now as we go through it. So the biggest reaction that I get, actually we go, yeah, as I was saying before, sorry about this, the biggest reaction from people who are using Speedlights for the first time is that their images look rubbish. They're not happy with the way they look because they're not used to using Speedlights, and you know, it's a new thing. So as I was saying, well, you could see it earlier, the strobes can be harsh, unforgiving, overpowering, or too weak, depending on what the setting is, frustrating, seemingly uncontrollable sometimes because they do their own thing, difficult to understand, and hopefully that sounds familiar to people. And yeah, so when I'm talking to photographers, they've tried flash photography and they often refer to themselves then as natural light photographers because they just like natural light because it's less hassle. And that's fine too. It's just I more gravitate towards flash and studio lighting rather than just natural light. So even outdoors, I'd bring out lights just to have something different, you know. Not that natural light isn't great. It's absolutely brilliant not to have to wreck your head trying to carry all the gear around, because trust me, carrying that gear is so heavy. So when using flash and strobes, right, this is one of the things that I've came across. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, because you will. But make sure you learn from them if you do make a mistake. All right. So remember, if you can remember this, right, there's no need to be scared of using flat speed lights or strobes. And when I say strobes, I mean like studio lights that you might have in a camera club or you might rent out somewhere. Don't be afraid and be scared of using them, okay? Just treat them the same as you would shutter speed, aperture, and ISO on your camera. And what I mean by that is this. When a while back, when actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick a maybe 1 second. I just want to stick a webcam into this section here, so 1 sec. PowerPoint. There we go. You should still be able to see me, and I'll just put it over here so it covers that. Now, so sorry about that. So when we all started photography, right, the first time we picked up a big camera that was, you know, it basically, we probably left it on auto, and we were happy enough to use that, okay? So for photographers nowadays, when I mention auto, like you're all probably there going, oh, you know, and we all kind of realize now that that might be a bad thing. It's okay to use auto if you're giving it to someone that's you know, that's on the street and you want them to take a shot of you standing up against something or whatever. But you know, photographers in general would never use auto because we just never would, basically. Hopefully we never would anyway. So we all then eventually learned to use just give me 1 second. There we go. Aperture priority, shutter priority, or time, the time on the Canons. So we started using aperture or shutter priority then to have at least some control of what was going on, okay? And now hopefully when we're using cameras, we all use M for manual. So hopefully everybody does that. And there's a reason for it. So using manual gives us total control, okay? So we have control over your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO. So if we have control over the three of them, if we change the aperture, something happens in the picture. It'll either get brighter or darker. If we change the shutter speed, something happens. The water will get blurry, or the raindrops will get sharper, depending on what you do. If you change the ISO, something happens. The image gets brighter, gets more grain. Okay? That's when we're in manual, we have total control over the three of those. So if we bring flash into the mix and call it, say, F for flash, okay? Just treat it like another tool that's part of your repertoire in your camera, okay? Because they're incredible. Like, I've seen the Modus 600 flash. I think the user manual for that, I've seen it. It's absolutely insane, and the font size is like, it's like this big. It's like size 2 font, and yet I've seen, you know, they're so complicated for what they are. The fancy high-end flashes, and then you get some flashes like the one that I have has 4 buttons on it. Happy days, way easy to use. So for ultimate control, whether you're indoors or outdoors in a studio or shooting outdoors, if you use manual mode on your camera and also on your flash, and by what I mean by that is also on your flash is this, right? I'm just going to switch back to this for a split second. Some Speedlights, when you go through the mode, won't just say manual and then slave. They might say TTL, high speed sync, you know, that have different modes, okay? But if you use manual, if you're in manual mode there on your camera, or sorry, on your flash, and say the flash isn't strong enough, as long as you don't change anything in your camera, within reason dependent, if you just power up the flash, so instead of being 1/8 power, you go to 1/4 power, then there's a stop more light coming out of the flash, and you can see the change that happens on your camera. You know, I'd always start off where I'm roughly 1/8 power, and I'd zoom it to 50 mil. That's a kind of a good start off point for me, because there's this thing, if you have your camera in at f8 ISO 100, and you put your flash about 8 feet away from whatever the thing is you're taking, and your flash is on 1/8 power at about 50 mil, it's roughly within the ballpark of being perfectly exposed, as long as you don't put an umbrella in front of the flash or anything like that. So f8, 1/8 power on your camera, or sorry, 1/8 power on the flash and f8 on your camera, and roughly 50 mil on the zoom, and you'll have a starting point so that you can just come along, put your camera wherever it is, put your flash there, and whatever you're taking there, and because there's 8 feet between the two of them, then at that particular setting there, it's a good starting point. Don't come in to do a shoot or something like that and have your camera or your flash on full power, because you've nowhere to go but down. And then at least if it's in the middle, and if it's a set point every single time, it makes it easier to set it up as it goes along. All right, so I'll just go back. Any questions on that, give me a shout. Just going back to PowerPoint here. So let me see. Here we go. Now, there are TTL triggers, right? I'm not saying don't use TTL triggers, okay? I'm not. But they will fight you every step of the way. All right? And this is going to probably annoy a lot of people. But they'll fight you, you know? What if you're longer zoom, Mary? Yes. Now, my flash there, that particular flash, has a 24:105 zoom on it, okay? So it only goes so far. But Canon make one, and I think it goes from 28 to 200. So you might have the ability with a higher end flash, an official flash from Canon or Nikon, to actually zoom into 200 mil. All you can do is set it to the most zoom you can get it to, and don't forget this, if you've got a 200 mil lens, 70 to 200 mil lens in your camera, right, and your flash is only got 105 or 135 mil, okay? The 200 mil lens is going to be in closer. It's going to crop the frame more, so the light's going to be on the outside. So yes, you're losing some light, but at least it's not the other way around, that you're going to have really dark edges around the outside, because you've set your flash to 135 mil and you're using a 24 mil wide angle lens, okay? I'm going to start on that, John, in a second, yeah. I'll be going through that now in a sec, John, as regards to the speed settings and stuff like that. So in regards to Mary's question, if you have a longer zoom, just zoom in the flash as long as you can, and you'll find that you'll probably have to turn up the power of the flash, and you might end up then eventually having to either turn down the aperture, widen open the aperture, or turn up your ISO to counteract it if it's not long enough. Because with a 200mm lens, if you want to get, obviously it's going to be closer, but if you want to get more into the picture, you're going to have to move back. And that's the thing with flash. It's another thing we'll go through in a few minutes, okay? And John, what speed should you start from? I'm going to cover that now in a few minutes, okay? So, I was just saying, TTL is going to fight you every step of the way. That's why you use manual, because at least in manual you're in total control of everything. So if there's not enough light in the scene from the flash, you can turn up the power of the flash. If there's too much light in the scene from the flash, you can turn down the power of the flash. So the whole point in that is, and I have to go through this PowerPoint first, and then it'll explain. How are you, Rob? How's it going? It'll explain a good bit of things that's going on, okay? So with flash photography, right, you cannot rely on your camera's light meter. The light meter that's built into your camera, you can't rely on it when you're using flash photography, okay? And I'll show you why. Basically, your camera's light meter takes the reading from outside. It doesn't understand that you've got a flash on your camera. Okay, so if you're using your flash in manual mode, it doesn't understand you have a flash in your camera and that the flash is going to put out X amount of light. Okay, but there's a couple of other things as well, and I'll go through them now. Your camera's light meter is trying to make 50% grey. Okay, and what I mean by 50% grey is this. It's actually trying to make that. Okay, that's a grey card. I'll just turn it back up here. Now, that's one of the pop out Elastilite grey cards, okay? Your camera's light meter is trying to create that 50% grey shade in every single image that it takes. It takes a colour scene in, and basically inside the camera in the light meter, it converts it to black and white, then basically melds all the colours together till it gets one shade of grey, and then your light meter will say, it's too dark, I'm on -1, telling you, okay, you have to overexpose, go up to 0, and then the light meter's happy, okay? But it's only happy because it wants to make this 50% grey. And if you make the light meter, on this particular card here, if you make the light meter reads in your camera, read 0 in the middle, you're fine. But the problem is you could be outdoors taking landscape shots. It's going to meld everything together, and it's going to want to make 50% grey. But depending on what mode you have on your camera in your partial in the metering section, it's going to completely mess up your light readings when you're using flash, okay? And also for landscapes, but we'll get onto that another day. So I'm just going to go back to the PowerPoint there now for a second. So basically, and if there's any questions on that particular thing, why your camera's light why it's making 50% grey, just send me a note there and I'll go through them. I'll just look over there every once in a while, okay? So an example of that is this, okay? Right. If we can imagine now, right, the image on the left, on the top and the bottom, it was taken using a professional light meter, okay? I'll just get one here for you now and show you what it looks like. It basically looks like that. It's one of those light meters, okay? And it takes a reading of the light that hits it and gives an exact reading, okay? It doesn't rely on what the inside of the camera relies on. So, and one of the I might actually go through using them. maybe in a week or 2 weeks, I'll actually go through how to use a light meter as well if people want to know that. So basically, the image on the left hand side there, that particular meter reading of 320th of a second, okay, all of these are taken at 2.8 at 100 ISO. So the light meter reading at 320th of a second. The black background in the top one and the white background in the bottom one. Because we told the camera to be on a certain it was in manual, it was 320th, it was f2.8, and it was 100 ISO. And we just ignored what the meter in the camera said. Now, if you use evaluative metering, or center weighted, or partial, or spot, they all change how the metering on this image is represented. And if you're using that meter on your camera to go up and down till it's 0, then on the center weighted one on the bottom there, it's -1 1/3 stops underexposed, because what your camera is seeing and what your meter reading in your camera is doing, it's seeing so much white in the image in the bottom middle one there that it wants to overexpose it. It's too bright. Sorry, it wants to underexpose it. It's too bright, and it wants to underexpose it. So it's saying that it's 1 1/3 stops over. Well, it's over that way, yeah. So it's left and right. So over. So then the meter's up here. So you're underexposing it by 1 1/3 stops to bring it back to 0 again. But the problem is, then it's at 800 of a second, and it's too dark, because your meter reading is telling you that. Your meter in your camera is telling you that, and you can't rely on what that's telling you. Okay? So the top one then will be 2/3 out. It's 2/3 the other way. It's 2/3 too bright, because it sees this expanse of black and wants to make the image brighter. It's always trying to make grey. Okay? If we look at this image here, the first one again, 320 to the second, on a black background, a black lens, and a white background and a black lens. It's exactly the same exposure on the lens, which is what it should be. But if we were to look at partial metering here and see the difference, it's 2 1/3 stops overexposed. Because we were looking, if you look at your camera's meter, it'll say I'm 2 1/3 stops under. So you're going to crank the exposure up till it says 0 again. But the problem is you're going to be 2 1/3 stops over the actual proper exposure. Okay? And it's even worse with that. It's 3 stops off with that one, you know. With that image there, it's 3 off, because you've got a black background and spot metering on the black. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to make black grey. It's trying to make the whole image meld it together to be grey. So it's not black where it should be in the first image. It's actually a neutral grey. And it's telling you that it needs to be 3 stops. There's 3 stops difference there. It's absolutely insane. It's just, some people don't realize that their camera meter is doing that, okay? And the same with this one here. It looks a little bit overexposed in the white here in the bottom on the screen there, but it's actually properly exposed. And yet it's all white on black. So it's the same idea. It's just realizing that your camera's meter is trying to make this 50% grey, and then counteracting that when you're actually taking pictures, okay? So the light meter here on the left and the right, they were both f2.8, 50mm, ISO 200, sorry, and 320 of a second. The actual subject, the monkey, is perfectly exposed in both of them. And that's that spike that's there in the middle there. And the black background is black and the white background is white. Because we trusted the light meter, the standalone light meter, the hand one. We trusted this to take the actual exposure reading. Or we use one of these, which is a grey card, okay? And I go through showing how to use that on the workshops that I do. It's quite simple, but give me a shout if you want to join in sometime when all this kind of malarkey is finished. So everything's still okay there, yeah? Yeah, 1, 2. So the next thing then with this kind of thing is you have to realize that Speedlight, thanks Rob. Speedlight TTL, right? The TTL in some speedlights, you can get like high end speedlights. I used to have a 580EX for Canon, and it was a lovely speedlight. And I had TTL features, and I have a Mets for my Panasonic as well, and it has TTL. But when you realise that the TTL um, is using your camera's light meter to get a reading off it, then it's also off. And you just have to realise that it is off, and that you need to correct it. Okay. So TTL in basically in flash, what it does is this: your speedlight in manual mode just fires one flash. Okay, it fires flash, bang, it's done. Okay, you check the picture. If it's too bright, you turn the power down on the flash. If it's too dark, you turn the power up. So with TTL, what happens is the flash fires a little pre-flash out first. So you put it in TTL mode. The flash fires pre-flash out, hits the subject, bounces back from the subject into the camera lens that's on the flash. Okay, so obviously the camera's down here. So the camera then reads that TTL, that pre-flash reading, and says to the camera, okay, give me exactly this power. And then the flash fires at the power it needs to be, and the TTL, it correctly exposes the image. Okay, but correctly exposes the image in relation to the camera meter being slightly off. So depending on what meter reading you're using, the correct exposure might not be exactly right. And that's where TTL, your flash exposure compensation comes in and stuff like that. I'll go through that now in a minute, okay? So knowing that speedlights use TTL, that's why I don't use the TTL, because they can be fooled as well. So if you had... Hi, Rob. Yeah, it is actually buffering a lot tonight. I don't know why. There's a little bit of buffering going on now. It's still coming live. I'm just checking something here. Yeah, it's still coming live, but there is a bit of buffering going on. You can always watch it later on anyway. I'll just reload the page, and it'll be probably higher resolution as well then. So, yeah, it's, they must we broke the internet, folks. Hey. So that's why we have, as I was saying, that's why we have exposure compensation on the on both flash and on non-photography flash as well. So if you're doing so basically, if you're in shutter speed or aperture priority on your camera, and you're just taking a landscape image, and you take a picture, and say, if you're in aperture, basically, when you set your aperture to say f8, your shutter speed is going to go up and down if your ISO is fixed, in order, basically, as you move around the scene, say you're pointing up at the bright sky, your shutter speed is going to go faster. You point it down at the dark landscape and the trees and all, the shutter speed is going to go up and down. So when you get your framing right and you take a picture and you don't like how it looks, if you're in aperture mode and you don't want to go to manual mode and dial it in, what you use exposure compensation on your camera, just RTFM, and you'll see exactly. Yeah, David Jad's high. Yeah. What brand internet have you got, Larry? It is Vodafone. It's been fine. Like it is actually working. I don't know whether it is on my side uploading. I've no idea. I don't think it is. I'll know tomorrow if it is, because I'll just check the quality of the video that got recorded, and if it's buffering as it was going up, then I know it's basically, I don't know, there's something going on. But no, it's been grand. The other few shots that we did, so if you're using shutter speed or aperture priority, you're basically the camera's meter is telling the shutter speed exactly what to do. But then you can have exposure compensation on your camera overwrite that. So if you're pointing at, say, a bright sky, your camera is going to take a darker picture, because that bright sky will be read by the camera as a bright scene, and it'll want to make it 50% grey. Yeah, the Virgin, yeah, not with them actually, so lucky enough. So it'll want to make it 50% grey. So basically what that does then is it means that the exposure is too dark. So then you have to put in exposure compensation to dial it back up, maybe by +2 stops. So that's why I use manual all the time, because I can take the picture and I just know it works. Okay, I teach people how to use their hand as an exposure reading as well when I do the workshops and stuff like that. It's really handy because you always have a second one. Hey, um, so. And TTL flash, then, if you're using the TTL, you have exposure compensation on your flash as well. So if you're going from a manual flash, which is nice and easy in relative terms, when you're using TTL, then you can also then do an exposure compensation on the flash. You've got all of this extra stuff that you know that kind of comes into play, like just basically making your life more complicated. It's not that complicated, but it's more complicated than it needs to be. So for ultimate control for me in a controlled environment, so not running and gunning at a wedding. This wouldn't really work at a wedding where you're running around the whole time when your flash is stuck to the top of your camera. What I do in manual, basically my flash is off camera and has a trigger. So basically I can move around if I'm taking pictures, but the light and the model or whatever I'm taking, that doesn't change, that distance doesn't change. So I'm not running and gunning the whole time. So I always use manual because I have ultimate control. Okay? And if something happens or changes because I did it, it's not because the camera was looking at, say, a bride against a white wall in a hotel, and then in the very next shot, the bride went off and all the groomsmen came in with dark suits. And the same shot then would be a completely different exposure because there'd be so much more black in the image. Whereas if in manual then, the bride and the groom would be exactly the same exposure because it wouldn't change. So as I was saying, TTL is going to fight you every step of the way. Okay, it's not a bad thing. It's just you have to know how to treat it. So for running and gunning from me on speedlights and cameras, TTL is fine, but beware of its eccentricities that I just went through. Because if you understand them, you can get around them. But sometimes when people get a brand new flash and they just switch it onto auto, and then they can't understand why sometimes they can't get a really moody shot with low light because everything is full on and it's perfectly exposed, but you wanted to get a nice kind of a nice moody shot in a bar or a pub or a dark scene somewhere, and this flash is just firing off at full power and the image is really too bright. It's because it's on TTL and you don't have the exposure control that you need, you know. And as I said before, don't, you know, your camera's meter is always trying to make this 50% gray, and if you get that, if you kind of understand that, you'll see it in your pictures. You know, I might talk about that at another point later on, not tonight though, but in a couple of weeks I might talk about more about that stuff. So your camera then is going to overexpose on a white image, and then it's going to, if you follow the meter reading, it's going to be over, and then what you're going to do then is you're going to bring it down, so your white image is not going to be white anymore, it's going to be dull gray. And then it's going to underexpose on a black image, and then your meter, if you bring your meter back up to brighten it up, then your black suits and all are going to be this, you know, darkish gray, light gray color. It's completely the wrong color. Okay, the black should be black and the white should be white. Okay, and that's why I always use manual, because I've got ultimate control over the whole thing. So if you're taking landscape shots or whatever, you're taking shots outdoors, and you're not using flash, that's fine. You just expose for what it looks like and nice in the back of the camera, and happy days. Plump a model in there, plump something, do whatever, take a picture of a car, whatever. But if you add flash into the mix, you need to start controlling the environment. Okay, and by that I mean this. Everyone okay so far? Any questions or anything like that? That's grand, Mary. Lovely. Happy days, John. You asked us, yeah, what speed? We will be going through the speed that you need to use, okay? That's grand. Cool. So for handiness sake, let's say this, right? Thanks, Daisy. You're grand. Let's say there's two types of light, okay? When you're dealing with, if you're dealing with putting flash into a scene or using a speed light, That's a light source, okay? That is. So is a studio light. That's another light source, okay? They're a different light source than a flashlight, and I'll show you why in a few minutes. So you've got two types of light, okay? You've got your ambient light, that's there the whole time, and you've got your flash or your strobe light, okay? And this is critical. You have to realize your ambient versus your flash and your strobe. So your ambient light is completely different to your flash or strobe light that you'll get out of a speed light or a studio light. Your ambient light is a constant light, and it's basically completely different. Your flash and your strobe is an instantaneous burst of light. If I was to fire this flash off, what you're looking at, like at me at the minute, here is ambient light. I have two lights above me there, kind of soft lighting me from down below. If I was to fire this flash off, that's here, I just pop the flash on. That's an instantaneous burst of light, okay? It's on for fractions of a second. It's not continuous, okay? Ambient light lasts for the length of the exposure. So if I'm taking an outdoor shot at night time and it's a 5-minute exposure to stars, it's 5 minutes worth of ambient light gets put on the scene. Whether it's 8,000 of a second for, say, a motorbike going around the corner and you want to capture that, or a really, really fast guy on a bicycle or something like that on bikes, whether it's 8,000 of a second or 30 minutes plus, that's all ambient light, right? Oh, hi Kenneth, how's it going? Now, a flash is completely different. It only lasts for fractions of a second, okay? So on my 580EX, the Canon flash that I used to have, and it'd be something similar on the flash that's there, at full power, which is 1:1, okay? 1:1 on the flash is full power, okay? As I was saying before, we'll just go back to this for a split second. I'll just zoom it back in. If I switch it on, okay? Right? If I dial that up, that's 1:1. It's full power, all right? And if I dial it all the way back down, 128 power, okay? Now, at 128 power, you have to realize this flash does not work like a dimmer switch on your wall, say for a ceiling light, okay? A dimmer switch on your wall dims the light. Flash doesn't dim. It's just the length of the actual time that the flash is on for. So at full power 1:1, it's on for 200 of a second. The flash is. And at 128 power, it's on for 1/65 thousandths of a second, okay? So we'll go back to the PowerPoint there. So basically, your full power, 200 of a second. So it's on for longer. Your flash is physically on for longer. And at 128 power, which is there, your flash is only on for 1/65 thousandths of a second, okay? Which is insane. That's all it's on for, 65 thousandths of a second, okay? So in order to use flash, you need to be able to control both your ambient light and the flash, and they get controlled separately. And whether it's inside or outside, so if it's in a studio, it's more critical. If it's outdoors, you have a little bit more leeway, but you still have to control it within reason, okay? So in general, this is in general, okay? Ambient light is controlled by your shutter speed, all right? And your flash or your strobe light is controlled by your basically your aperture or your f-stop. So if you think of flash being f-stop, then your shutter speed is your ambient, okay? And the reason why your flash is controlled by your f-stop is your flash can be 65 thousandths of a second, okay? Your shutter speed can't go to 65 thousandths of a second. It you know, at best 8,000 of a second, okay? And if you're using manual speed lights, I'll go through that in a minute, it won't be anywhere near that fast. So the only thing you have is your aperture, is the hole size in the actual lens. So you smaller hole lets in less light, so as fast as the light's going on with a flash, it's going through a hole and it's smaller. It's basically the hole smaller so you let less light in. So your f-stop controls your flash basically, within reason, okay? And ISO controls both. So ISO, up in your ISO will control both the ambient light and it will make the flash brighter as well. It does the two of them, okay? So any questions on that, just pop up a question there. So as I was saying before, you need to control both the light inside and outside of a studio. If you're shooting indoors, say in this case, we're all shooting indoors because we can't go outside, like, you know, for another couple of weeks anyway. So you need to control the light that's inside, you know. So basically, if you can control the light if you're shooting indoors, then you can stop light pollution. You can stop white balance issues, which can happen. And the solution to that is this: your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. You need to set them so that if you're shooting indoors, you need to be able to take a picture, and I'll just show you here, right? You need to be able to take a picture on your camera that has, without a flash beam on it, that has absolutely nothing in it. So you need to be able to not see anything, okay? So indoors you need a black image, so there's no detail capture without the flash. Yeah. So up to that point there, we need to basically, with our cameras, we need to have an exposure that controls the environment, okay? It controls the light in our scene, okay? So I have to get my camera now and set it back up to ridiculous 51,200 ISO. Okay, so I'm on 51,200 now, and I'm going to take a picture, and we look back at bridge here and Photoshop. So there's a photograph, okay? That's the photograph we just took. Now I need to control that because I didn't have any flash on my camera, so I actually need to be able to control that environment and have no exposure happen when I'm taking the picture, because I only want flash to be the only thing that goes to light the actual image, okay? So I'm going to go back down on my ISO. I'm just going to go back to my Panasonic here. And yeah, so I'm going to choose on the ISO, I'm going to go back from 51,000. I'm going to go all the way back to 100 ISO, and you'll see basically immediately that the picture gets really, really, really dark. I'm going to leave it on, say, f5.6, all right? And I'm on 200 a second. Now, the reason I'm on 200 a second is because of the sync speed thing, and I'm going to tell you now in a few minutes what that is, because we didn't get around to it because I had a bit of a problem there. And I'm just going to check that... Hey Justin, how's it going? You didn't miss much. Let me know if everything's all right there. So one of our frontline workers just joined us there. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to take an image, and on the back of my camera I can actually see this. So I'm going to show you what happens on my camera for 1 second. I'm just going to go to the iPhone there, and on the back of my camera, going to go back to here. Now, when I press down the shutter button, it brightens up ever so slightly, and it shows me what I'm looking at. So if I was to look at that down there, it's very, very obviously, right? It just brightens up a little bit. There we go. You see that? So it brightens up for a split second. So I can kind of half see what I'm doing. But that's because it's a mirrorless camera. It's a full frame mirrorless, but it's a mirrorless camera. So I'm going back to, now could you hear me there on the iPhone 8? I'm just wondering. Yes, you can. That's grand. So we'll go back to the picture. Sorry about that. So I'm basically back on 100 ISO and 200 a second at 5.6. And what's going to happen now when I take the picture is it's going to be pitch black. iPhone. So if we go back to Photoshop. Yeah. There's nothing in the image, okay? So that's what I mean by controlling the actual exposure in your image. So if I was to pop the flash on now, okay, So I'm actually not going to pop the flash. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to stick the flash on the top of the camera. I'm going to pop the trigger on top of the camera. So I'm going to go back to my iPhone 8 there for a split second. So this is the overhead view. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this trigger, put it on top of the camera. And then I'm literally going to take the flash and just put it on the desk. Put it somewhere nearby so that it lights the scene, okay? That's all I'm going to do. So I'm going to switch Speedlight on and leave it on 1/8 power. So let's dial it up to its 1/8 exactly, okay? And then switch my trigger on. And my trigger's on 1/8. So sometimes the trigger will eventually take over. So if I go up, it goes up. Now you see the way it's not going up there now. Oh, it is. There we go. So it's on a quarter. I go back down. Right. So now I'm on 1/8 on both of those. So if I lift them up there, you'll see it. There we go. So 1/8 and 1/8. Alright. And as I go up on the trigger here, it goes up on the flash. Okay. Go down on the trigger. Goes down in the flash. And I have my zoom on 50. That's just a preset happy thing that I'm happy with. Alright. So literally all I'm doing is I'm placing the flash just over in the corner. Literally, if you've seen how little amount of room I have here, it's ridiculous. But I'm just going to place the flash somewhere in the scene. And it's pointing, basically the flash is pointing at, I'm going to show you where it is actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to crank my ISO back up again to ridiculous ISO. So, sorry, gotta go. No bothers, Daisy. Take it easy. Have a good one. So my ISO, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it back up to a really, really high ISO. Just so I can show you the actual scene that I'm working with, okay? So this is literally what I'm working with here. I just want to make sure that's live. There we go. So a couple of monitors going on, and that's the iPhone. It's so sketch. It's not even funny, okay? But basically, if you look at where the Speedlight is, it's basically just pointing down at that. That's all it's doing, okay? So just reference that in your head. It's about 2 feet away, and it's just going to work. It's just going to fire, okay? So I'm going to go back down with my ISO now again from 51,000. The only reason I'm doing that is so that you could see it on the screen, okay? If I put my flash trigger on my camera now, so yeah, and all I'm going to do is just take a picture. Okay, and we'll see what we get. This is just showing you how you'd work it, right? So there's the exposure. Obviously it's a bit too bright, okay? So how do we fix that? A couple of things we can do. So I'm just going to show you the exposure there now. So there's the exposure we got, okay? Obviously it's too bright. Now remember, our flash was on what you call it? Sorry about that. Here we go. Webcam. Yeah, our flash was on f8 1/8 power, and my camera was on 5.6. So if I turn my camera now, and it's on 200 a second at ISO 100, if I change the camera f-stop up to f8, okay, what I've basically changed is I've changed the amount of light getting into the camera by 1 full stop. I didn't go near the power on the flash, okay? So if I just take the same shot again, Let me just go back and have a look at Photoshop there, and you can see now from that shot to that shot, it's a stop less. Okay, and that's all it is, and the exposure is probably right somewhere in the middle there. It's a little bit dark on that side and it's bright on that side. That is to do with the inverse square law, which I am not getting into tonight because I could do an actual half an hour on it, and we will do it again though. But just leave a message if you want me to cover it at some point. There's no problem. I have loads of stuff I can talk about. But I just wanted to show you that that's basically where the flash was. So if you look at, actually, yes, this might work here, right? So if I go back to the Panasonic. Now, because I put the flash trigger on top of my camera, the camera artificially brightens up the entire image, okay? And it has it gives me the ability then to see what I'm doing on the back of the camera. If I was to turn my trigger off, I'm turning the trigger off. Watch this. I'm going to turn the trigger off now. And then the scene goes. I can still, I haven't changed that. It's just the camera doesn't artificially brighten the image. But because there's no flash on, if I take a picture now, it's going to be completely black. I turn the trigger back on. It artificially brightens the image for me so I can see what I'm doing. And I take a picture. And I go back over to Photoshop here to the bridge. And that's my other picture. Okay? So, I'm just going to go back to PowerPoint there for a second. Right, so any questions on that? And hopefully that did cover the little bit that we missed when the audio went kind of AWOL on us. So any questions on that before we continue? That's grand, Mary. Alright, so literally then, that's just kind of where we've stopped off. Now, so setting up your camera to work with Speedlights. Thanks, John. And studio lights, okay? It's actually not that hard. I suppose like everything else, when you know how, it's very simple. And it's just a couple of settings. So basically, if you're taking natural light shots, right, as I was saying before, because I had to reverse back on it. So if you want to keep the depth of field, then you change the flash power. Yes, David. Yeah. If, argument's sake, you're taking a shot and you need depth of field to be f8, f9, f10, f11, you're going to have to up your power of your flash. Because obviously, f8 is a bigger aperture than f16. So if you go from f8 to f16, you're losing stops of light, so you have to up your power to compensate. So the only disadvantage of that is you're going up to wider depth of field, f11, 13, 16. You're going to kill the power of your flash more because it has to up the power of your flash. Either that or move the flash closer. That's the other thing you can do, okay? If you have the ability to get the flash off your camera and you can move the flash closer to the subject, then you don't necessarily have to actually up the power of the flash when you change your aperture. You can close down your aperture from, say, f8 to f11 to f16 and just move the flash incrementally closer to the subject. And as long as the flash isn't in the frame, if the flash is there, it's going to be a problem. But if it's moved out of the frame, then it's not so much of a problem anymore. Okay? So you don't have to have the flash. If you can get your flash off your camera, once the flash comes off the camera, get it, detach it, get a trigger, then the flash can go wherever it wants. So that's why that's good, So yeah, if it's on the camera, the only thing you can do is turn up the power of your flash or turn your ISO up. That's it. So, thanks, no problem, Top. So when you're using flash and strobes, things get different, okay? So when you're taking natural light shots, any shutter speed will work. You can go from a shutter speed of, as I was saying before, anywhere from 8,000 of a second up to 20, 30 minutes, depending on what you're taking a picture of. Whereas if you need to, when you're using flash, you have to understand your camera's flash sync speed. And what your camera's flash sync speed is the fastest your camera will sync to the flash and not have black bars in it. And I'll show you what that is now in a second. So you need to keep your shutter speed below or at your max sync speed of your camera. And if you go above it, you get this kind of a problem going on. So the Canon 80D, I was doing this before and I would just look back and I seen that there was no audio on one of the scenes. I came out literally 50 minutes beforehand and I just forgot to add a couple of audio tracks to the software. So Canon 80D, 250 of a second. That's the sync speed for the Canon. It's there, okay? So if you go up to 500, you'll get this black bar. It'll start encroaching in on the image. And if you go to 1,000 of a second, it gets even worse, okay? So you have to understand that that's going on. So we'll go over high-speed syncing a bit, which is a way of getting around that effect. But let's cover the non-high-speed sync speedlights first. So basically, like my speedlight that was there, that's a non-high-speed sync speedlight. It's a dumb one. It doesn't have the amount of pins that I was showing you beforehand. So if it only has, just turn it off. You can probably see it there, hopefully. It only has one pin in the middle, okay? When you look at a speedlight, if it only has one pin in the bottom, it's a completely manual speedlight. You get them for buttons. They work. They are brilliant, but you just have to understand how to set them, okay? So we're going to cover the non-HSS speedlights first, right? So what is flash sync, okay? The flash sync is how the camera synchronizes with the flash so that the light emitted from the flash is recorded on the entire sensor, okay? There's no gaps, okay? And that's your flash sync speed. Because if you go faster than that, there's a gap then in the sensor. And I'll show you why that works, right? Yeah, that's right, Justin, yeah. You were listening. The handiest way, one of the handiest ways to find out what your flash sync speed is either RTFM, or if you have a flash in your camera, if you set, say, go to shutter speed and set it to 1,000 of a second, doesn't matter what you're taking a picture of, just set it to 1,000 of a second, pop your flash up, and what will happen is the minute the flash pops up on your camera, your flash will go back down again to its maximum sync speed. On some Nikons, that's 320 of a second. On mine, it's 250 of a second. On some Canons, it's 200 of a second. On my old Panasonic, it was 160 of a second. Okay? So either RTFM, or if you have a flash in your camera, just pop it up and try and dial up the shutter speed, and it'll stop at a certain point, and that's your flash sync speed, okay? Some cameras don't have flashes built into them, some of the higher end ones, so you can't pop the flash up to find out. So in that case, RTFM. So what happens is this, right? At 200 of a second, if you can imagine, that's your shutter speed on the left there. Sorry, that's your shutter on the left. The first shutter comes down, entire sensor gets exposed. The second shutter comes down and the exposure ends, okay? So if the flash fires now, the entire sensor was exposed when the flash was firing. So the camera sync speed of 200 of a second, the entire sensor was exposed at exactly the same time, and the one flash covered the entire sensor, okay? So now if we go up from 200 of a second up to 600 of a second, you'll see that only half the sensor is exposed at any one time, because when the first curtain comes down, the second curtain follows it, and the entire sensor is not exposed at the same time. So less of the sensor is exposed. So basically, that's where you get your black bar. Your black bar will appear in your image because at 600 of a second, when the flash fires just once, like that, it only exposed the image. And it's half the image was exposed. And basically, you've got your black bar. And because what gets recorded on the back of the sensor in the camera is actually a mirror image of what actually is recorded. That's why the black bar is at the bottom, even though the flash fired now, when the sensor came down from the top and opened, and the minute that last sensor, the shutter, sorry, the last shutter came down, it just before that came down, the flash fired. So that's why it was exposed at the bottom. Sorry, it does it at the bottom. So the shutter comes down, and then the second one comes down, and the minute the first one hits the bottom, and the second one's following it, then the flash gets fired. So the black is upside down. It's a little bit complicated, sorry about that. So 1,000 of a second then is even worse. 1,000 of a second, you've got a tiny slice of this, the actual sensor gets exposed at any one time, and basically the one flash can't light the whole sensor. So the higher the shutter speed, then the smaller the slit and the faster it moves across the sensor. So that's why when you get into high speed sync, that gets you past your camera's sync speed, you have to use certain technologies. High speed sync is one, and I'll talk about another one now as well, right? So any questions on that? So the solutions to that, right, are obviously high speed sync, which we're going to talk about now. This is how high speed sync works, okay? So you get multiple flashes firing, and they fill in the sensor as the actual shutter blades come down. The slit gets filled in by firing. It goes bang, 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 fires the whole way down, and it fills it in, okay? You get multiple shots. So at 1,000 of a second, only a small section of the sensor is actually exposed, and that sensor, it gets fired and fired and fired. There could be a couple of could be 80, 90, 100, 200 shots being fired in that 1,000 of a second, just to make sure that the entire sensor gets flooded with light, okay? So the higher the shutter speed, then the smaller the slit, and exactly the same again. So now high speed sync, right? That's how that works. And it was developed by Nikon and Canon. It creates a continuous light across the sensor. That's the plus it has. So because it fires multiple small flashes, it fills the whole sensor with continuous light, which is what you want, which is brilliant. And you don't have any variance through it, okay? That's a plus, right? A minus side of that is, due to the amount of light bursts that it has to fire multiple flashes. The light output is greatly reduced. So if you have to go into high speed sync on your flash in order to shoot, say, at 500 of a second or 1,000 of a second, you will see the amount of light coming out of your flash dramatically decrease. So you'll have to move your flash closer to the subject, or you'll have to crank your ISO up, or you'll have to get a more powerful flash, or studio strobe. So that's the minus side of it. And also your batteries get used faster. It will eat through batteries when it's doing that multiple flashes per second, okay? Now the other solution to that, apart from high speed sync, it's not available on Speedlights, but the other solution is high sync or hypersync. And it basically works like this, and it's only available on, I think it's Elechrome. Yeah, Elechrome lights have it. So basically what happens here is, it figures out at the start of the exposure, when the exposure starts, right? And just wait till this graphic finishes. When the exposure starts, it fires the flash right there, and it makes the flash duration longer and stops the flash duration. So that entire section is full of flash. And then this ODS tuner then moves left or right in milliseconds in order to maximize the amount of light that comes out of it. And it's just a different way of doing things, and it has its own kind of eccentricities. So the hypersync stuff that you get with Elechrome, it times the flash duration to match the shutter speed, and it works better with slower shutter speeds, obviously, or with more powerful flash. The plus side is it doesn't lose power like the high speed sync shots do over long distances. So if you're shooting long distance shots and you need flash, if you have a high sync thing from Elechrome, one of the compatible triggers and compatible lights, what happens is you don't lose power over the full length of the flash. So basically you can stay 20 feet back. You don't have to get closer, kind of thing. The only problem is the minus side. It's only compatible with some of the Elechrome range of lights, and it can leave you with a slight gradient in the image, which is quite easy to fix. Okay, so that's a representation of the gradient that might be in the image. You can see it there from the top to the bottom, the way it has a gradient, because it doesn't expose the light over the entire sensor exactly the same amount. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up and just show you inside of Photoshop how easy it is to actually fix that, because it's not a major problem. So, and if you were using Edenchrome stuff, it's not a deal breaker by any matter of means. So I'm just going to switch over here for a sec. Right, so there's a couple of ways of doing it. Say we pretend that's a JPEG, or well, it is a JPEG, but let's say it's a RAW file. We can bring it into Camera Raw. Now, if it's a JPEG, we can force it to go into Camera Raw by just right-clicking on it and saying Open in Camera Raw. Okay? So we can get it into Camera Raw. And you can see the gradient there that's happening, right? But inside of Camera Raw, there's a nice little handy tool. It's the gradient tool in the top there. If we click on it, and we just reset everything back to 0, so there's nothing on the adjustment tool, and starting the top and left click and just drag down. You see the way it's very, very hit and miss there to get a vertical line. If you hold down the shift key, it snaps to a vertical line, which is dead handy. And then if we bring it down, and then if we go into the exposure slider, just click in the exposure dialog box and hold shift down and press up once, and that adds a half a stop of light in a gradient. And the only thing that's left wrong now is just here. There's still a slight gradient in there and there. So what we do is just grab the top of the gradient, because the green, and just bring it down and hold down the shift key, and it constrains it to 90 degrees. So the top half of the actual picture up here is a full half a stop over, and then where the green gradient starts, it gets gradually less to the red then at the bottom where there's nothing. So by just simply adding that before and after, so P for preview, before, P after, and that fixes the gradient that can happen with high sync. Okay, that's one of the ways to fix it, and it's really, really simple. All right, so I'm going back to PowerPoint again. We're nearly finished, folks, which you'll all be happy, delighted with. So the long and the short of it is general camera settings for use of Speedlights off of camera. All right, your shutter speed, roughly 160 of a second if you're using flash. It's a good place to start. It keeps below your max sync speed, because most of the cameras nowadays can do 160 of a second. If you've got a Nikon, you can up it a little bit. Just beware when you up the shutter speed, you're darkening your ambient light as well. So it depends on what you're trying to do, whether you're trying to mix light and stuff like that. It's not the webcast isn't about that kind of thing. It was just to do with Speedlights, an intro to Speedlights, and I think we've gone way more complicated than an intro, but that happens sometimes. So about 160 of a second is a good place to start. Your ISO, leave it at your base ISO, which is usually 100 ISO. It gives you your cleanest image. And then your aperture, set it as needed. So as I was saying before, if you have a flash, and it's say a high end kind of, it's one of the 58 flashes, say, or the 580EX or a 600 RT Canon or an SB9000, one of the flashes that's the high-end ones, they have a guide number of 58 roughly, and if you set them to about an f8 on your camera and 1.8 power, and you put the flash about 8 feet away from the subject, it's roughly going to be in the ballpark where you need to get, and then it's just a tiny little tweak. And obviously the smaller the aperture, so the more power you need. So if you go from f8 up to f16, you're going to have to up the power. All right. That's the end of the PowerPoint presentation anyway. And we're just about finished. So I'm just going to ask everybody any questions before we finish. Oh, David, how you going? Sorry, my 5D Classic isn't switching to high-speed sync. If we go over 1/60th of a second on my 70th switches automatically, am I doing something wrong? What Speedlight do you have, Dave? Because the newer 700D is newer than your. I had the 5D, okay? It was a brilliant camera. I had the 5D, I had the 580EX flash, and had the 7200 f2.8. All the Godox. Oh, the Godox TT6. Inside the Godox menu, if you find the high-speed sync option and switch it on, it should then allow you to go over 160 of a second on the 5D. The 700D probably has a feature where it auto switches, communicates with the flash and auto switches the flash into high speed sync, but you might just be able to set the flash itself to high sync mode, HSS mode. So go through the flash modes. It'll be manual, HSS, probably a TTL mode, and you probably have a slave mode as well. Just go through the modes, and one of them might be high speed sync, and that might get you over that hump where the 5D stops. How are you, John? Yeah, I'll be on again. This is what, Tuesday. We're doing a Zoom meeting with the camera club tomorrow night, so I'll be on again Thursday, John. Tried switching flash manual, doesn't change. Well, the flash in manual won't change. If try switching the flash to high speed sync, so HSS on the flash, if the flash has it. Godox TT600. I'm just gonna I'm gonna take a note of that, David, and I'm gonna find out if that flash actually has it. No worries, John. Thanks. You made everything very clear. Thanks. Oh, no worries. Thanks, Michael. Yeah. It's so nice to hear that actually, because usually after one of these kind of things, it's as clear as about a bucket of mud. Okay, right. I'm going to have a look. Thanks, Chris. I'm going to have a look. It's definitely a Godox TT600 is the actual brand name. The actual serial number is TT600. I'll have a look for that and see why it's not switching on the 5D. Because in theory, you should be able to go above that. Now, I'm only hoping. Do you know anybody that that has, say, a 580EX flash or an actual Canon branded flash that does TTL? Because maybe it could be the case where the 5D doesn't actually have the ability. Oh no, it switches over automatically. It switches over on the 700D. Yeah, maybe the 5D doesn't have the ability to do high speed sync. So that's another thing I'll check. I'll check that for you, Dave. Does the 5D do high speed sync? Because you could be just, it might literally not do high speed sync, the 5D. You can put a 600 RT, €600 flash on the thing, and it might not do high speed sync. I'll check on that, Dave, and I'll email you back. Right, I might not check it tomorrow morning or something like that, but I will email you back. Anyone else? Any other questions? Because that was deadly, having a little bit of questions and answers at the end of that there now. Hopefully you all enjoyed it and appreciate the the madness that it was trying to set all this up. It's good fun though. No bothers at all, Dave. Yeah, so what I'll do now is I'm going to sign off, and I'll be up at this again on Thursday. I'll put a link up probably tomorrow to my Facebook page and stuff like that, and I'll figure out what I'm going to do. I have a couple of things that people have wanted to kind of go through, so I'll pick one of them and just go through it. It was great doing this. I do an awful lot more when I'm doing one of the workshops that I do, but I tried to cover a little bit. It's kind of really hard. Oh, thanks, John. Learn to sync the hard way. Yeah. Yeah. The high speed sync is very. Just once you go into high speed sync, it does eat the battery, and your power goes down the toilet, because it's multiple flashes per second, and no bother, breathe it. Thanks. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Multiple flashes a second, and it literally kills the battery. You know. So basically, what it does is this: if I was to turn on this, if I put this on multi, and I'm just going to fire this off now, right? So you'll see it there now. So you can hear it. You'll probably hear it. It's kind of right. That's how it'll fire flashes like that. So if I was to slow the speed of that down, and I slowed it down, this is the multiple flash option on this. If I slow it down now, it fires 5 flashes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if you can imagine that speeded up, only 100 flashes or 200 flashes, depending on what it needs to do to fill in that high speed sync gap that happens when you shoot at high speed sync. You can understand why the battery just gets knackered. Okay. Yeah, I'll probably do. I'd love to find somewhere where I could just set up a load of big stuff and just do a live thing like this. Would be absolutely fantastic. So I'll find that out for you, Dave, tomorrow, and I will get back to you. And I'll sign off for tonight, and hopefully see most of you here on Thursday. And have a good one. Stay safe.